The U.S.-Mexico border, El Paso and Ciudad Juarez, here in the heart of the Chihuahuan Desert, at the start of the Rocky Mountains, these two communities come together unlike any two communities anywhere else in the world. In fact, if you're not from here, you wouldn't know that you're looking at two different cities in two different countries that come together at this one point. When I'm able to bring friends here or colleagues from Washington, D.C., they're immediately blown away and they fall in love with this place. The same way that I have, even though I was born here, I fall in love every single time I come back from Washington, D.C., as I did last night. I'm raising my kids here with my wife, Amy. My friends are here. My life is here. And I have the incredible honor of representing this community in Congress. In fact, the first date I was on with Amy, in order to really try to win her over and impress her, I took her to the Kentucky Club in Ciudad Juarez. It's just, if you can see the mural of Juan Gabriel, it's just across the street from where that is. And after a drink, we went to Martino's. And then afterwards, we walked up Avenida Juarez over to the little plaza in front of the cathedral and sat in front of the Misión de Guadalupe, built over 350 years ago. And I could tell as she was falling in love with this community, which she was not from, that I was falling in love with her, and that we had a match, and that we had a connection. And I think many of you who are from here feel the same way that I do, this incredibly wonderful, beautiful, safe, warm, and welcoming community. And it becomes very hard to explain things like this. And so I have, as probably many of you have, been struggling to understand not just how somebody could say things like this about Mexico and Mexican immigrants, or suggest that we build a 50-foot wall to separate our two countries. As my friend, the Mexican Senator Gabriela Cuevas said, what's truly disturbing is that someone can say this and have these ideas resonate with such a significant part of our country. So I'm seeking to understand the conditions that created this opportunity for people to demonize the border and to believe that it is as bad as some would have you believe. And then what we can do to change that. Things like this don't help. This is a headline in the Washington Times talking about an ISIS training camp in the middle of Ciudad Juarez. Now, we all know there is not, nor has there ever been, an ISIS training camp in Ciudad Juarez. But people write about this, and the people who read it believe it. And it becomes very believable because this isn't the first time that we hear stories like these. My friend Patrick Timmons shared this headline from the 1981 El Paso Herald-Post. Back then, Libyans and Libyan terrorists were the boogeymen of the day, much the way that ISIS is the boogeyman of our day, Al-Qaeda was right after 9/11. And it seems that this country, when it's unable to resolve or figure out how to solve a troubling issue, especially if it's foreign in nature, it projects both the problem and the solution to the US-Mexico border. And in some ways, it's understandable. And in some ways, it corresponds with human nature. And in some ways, it's intuitive. This is where our country meets the rest of the world. The rest of the world, it doesn't necessarily look like the majority of this country, that doesn't speak the same language, that has different traditions and cultures and values. Those are things that allow us to believe stories when we read something like this. It also helps explain headlines like this one, also from 1981, also from El Paso. Here we are involved in civil wars in Central America, and understandably, those Central Americans, in this case, folks from El Salvador, flee horrific violence and brutality, come through Mexico to the United States to seek refuge and shelter. Now, this is something that should be very familiar to us. We see headlines like this all the time over the last few years as violence grips the Northern Triangle countries of Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. And we don't talk about welcoming them or sheltering them or making sure they're okay. We talk about their impact to us, the fact that they're hitting our country, or in a lot of the headlines that we read today, flooding the border, almost as though it's a natural disaster for which we have to respond. This is a headline that goes a little bit back further in time. This is the El Paso Herald from January 2nd, 1913. You can see perhaps the top of the headline. I'll read the first sentence of this story for you. Marijuana, that native Mexican herb which causes the smoker to crave murder, is held accountable for 2 deaths on the streets of El Paso yesterday. There's a little bit more to the story. The murderer is identified as a Mexican. And we don't know, because back then, a Mexican was both a Mexican national and a Mexican American. So we don't know if he was a citizen of the United States or a citizen of Mexico. It was sufficient to label him a Mexican. And it seems kind of silly to us today, laughable even, but it had some really pernicious consequences. Not too long after this headline is written, the El Paso City Council becomes one of the first in the country to outlaw marijuana, to criminalize marijuana, specifically because it's connected to the influx of Mexican immigrants and our fears of what those Mexican immigrants would do to us, especially if they were high on this murderous drug, marijuana. And as migrants made their way up the Rocky Mountain path to farm fields and work in day laborer jobs from New Mexico to Colorado up to Montana, state after state, community after community criminalized marijuana until 1937. We criminalized it at the federal level, again, citing its influence on Mexicans, Mexican Americans, and African Americans in this country. The origins of these laws were inherently racist. Now, all of these issues are really serious ones, whether we're talking about terrorism, our broken immigration system, or our insatiable appetite for illegal drugs. These are issues that we must deal with in this country. And these are all issues which we've been unsuccessful in resolving domestically. And so it becomes easier for us as a country to blame somebody else, to blame Mexico, and to focus our attention and resources and powers and fears at the place where Mexico joins this country, here in El Paso and Ciudad Juarez, the US-Mexico border. It's understandable, but it's absolutely wrong. When you think about terrorism, there has never been a terrorist incident, a terrorist plot, or a terrorist organization that has infiltrated the United States through the US-Mexico border. However, when we focus on problems where they are not, I fear that we take our eye off the ball where they have proven to be. Terrorists have tried to enter this country through our northern border with Canada. They've come in through our international airports, and they've been radicalized in this country through the internet and through other means. Those are very real, serious problems with which we must deal. But by focusing on the border, we lose the opportunity to do that. When it comes to immigration, it's important for you to know that we have the lowest levels of illegal immigration in this country in modern history. In fact, in the last 4 years, more people from Mexico have gone south back into that country than have come north into the United States. In the last year, the average Border Patrol agent in the El Paso sector, one of the largest sectors along the 2,000-mile US-Mexico border, made just 5 apprehensions. And not 5 apprehensions for their shift, or for the week, or for the month, but 5 apprehensions for the entire year. We don't have the problems that people would have you believe, but when you talk about a border that is insecure, when you talk about people flooding our connection with Mexico, it becomes a believable excuse for not moving forward with things like immigration reform. And on the last point, we spent over $1 trillion to try to control our appetite for illegal drugs, and primarily for marijuana. And thankfully, this country is coming to a far more sensible, humane, rational conclusion on this issue. 25 states already have made this legal at some level and are acknowledging that the threat that we thought we had in 1913 that continued for more than 100 years is really not there, at least not in the way that we thought it was. But until we reschedule marijuana from a Schedule I drug, we're going to continue to have the largest prison population in the world. Last year, we put more than 600,000 people behind bars for marijuana possession alone. And we will continue to spend billions of dollars of our precious resources on a problem or a war that we will never win. And focusing on these things, I think, doesn't allow us to talk about the amazing things that are happening here in our community. For example, $90 billion in US-Mexico trade passed through our ports of entry last year. That's connected to 1 out of every 4 jobs in this community, over 500,000 jobs in the state of Texas, and 6 million jobs nationally. It also happens that the US side of the US-Mexico border is far safer than the average city in the interior of our country. In fact, El Paso, Texas is the safest city in America today, and it has been for the last 4 years running. So we have never been more important to the US economy. We've never been more critical to job growth, not just in our city and not just in our state, but throughout our union. And we have never been safer. But the facts and our experience in this beautiful city have obviously not proven sufficient to change the narrative. So to answer the second question, how do we change the conditions? I propose that we all embrace our story and that we tell it to each other and we tell it to everyone that we know and the people that we will meet throughout this country so that a different narrative of El Paso and Ciudad Juarez of the US-Mexico border takes hold. This is a place where our nations come together. Their best ideas meet. Literally, the leaders of the 2 countries are here in Ciudad Juarez, in El Paso, in this picture in 1909. The first time the 2 presidents of these 2 countries ever met, they met right here, just blocks from where we're sitting today, and then had another meeting in Ciudad Juarez. And by the way, neither of them needed a translator because both spoke both English and Spanish. In 1967, you have the presidents of our 2 countries again meeting here to commemorate a peaceful resolution to a border dispute that would have ended in war or conflict anywhere else in the world. The genius of our 2 countries and the genius of where they meet is that we can solve things that others can't solve and can serve as the model for conflicts and borders all over the rest of the world. This is a community and a part of the world whose ambition and leadership allowed it to become a leading American city. This headline is from 1912, and it's when Arizona and New Mexico were first admitted into the Union. And a state jubilee had to be held, and the leading contenders to host it were Los Angeles, California, and El Paso, Texas. And we won, and we hosted it. And not only did we have the governor from New Mexico, the governor from Arizona, and the governor from Texas here, but we also had the governor of Sonora and Chihuahua, all of them together here for a week-long celebration, parades, and baseball games. Each state was going to field its best baseball team, and El Paso, showing our ambition at the time, recruits Chick Brandon, who was the 1909 World Series winning pitcher for the Pittsburgh Pirates. He played for the El Paso team during this statehood jubilee. This is the community that shows that Mexican Americans and Mexican immigrants define the best of who we are as Americans. These are the men from Company E, an all-Latino unit, many of them literally plucked from the classrooms at Bowie High School to go fight the Nazis in North Africa first and then in Italy. And many of the men whose pictures are behind me on this screen lost their lives fearlessly crossing the Rio Rapido to their deaths against an entrenched German position. Their younger brothers formed the 1949 Bowie Bears high school baseball team, the team that would win the first Texas high school baseball championship, a team that was impoverished, the younger brothers of these brave men who died on the Rio Rapido, whose gloves were made at home by their moms, who, when they traveled to the championship game in Austin across the state of Texas, were met by signs in restaurant windows that said, "No Mexicans or dogs allowed." And when they arrived on the field, unable to stay in a hotel, slept under the bleachers on the field on which they would play the next day and win that game 4-3, bringing renown and honor to themselves, to our community, and to what it means to be an American. When we accept that story and tell it to ourselves and share it with others, really good things start to happen. We begin to invest in ourselves and attract and draw investment from others. This is the El Paso Chihuahuas ball field, the finest AAA ballpark in the country. And by the way, it contains a beautiful mural of the 1949 Bowie Bears. You can see Ciudad Juarez in the background of the stadium. This is the first four-year medical school built anywhere along the US-Mexico border. And this is a picture of our beautiful downtown featuring San Jacinto Plaza, a downtown that has seen over $1 billion of investment, showing it's proof that we believe in ourselves once again. This is a community that overcomes obstacles. We haven't passed comprehensive immigration reform, so that when my constituent, our fellow citizen, Edgar Falcon, wanted to marry the woman of his dreams, Mari Cruz from Durango, and was unable to do that here because she's not a US citizen, and when she was 12 years old, she falsely claimed citizenship when she was crossing the bridge. Now, you tell me who understands the concept of citizenship at the age of 12, but because of that minor infraction of immigration law, she is never allowed to set foot in this country again. So Edgar and Mari Cruz met on the international line of the Paso del Norte Bridge. They were married by Judge Moody, and then we all repaired back to Ciudad Juarez for a fantastic wedding reception. But more importantly, Edgar Falcon worked with me in my office to write a bill, the American Families United Act, with Republican co-sponsors, which if we can pass, will fix just this one small part of immigration law. And that idea came from this community. We are a people now who are going to join together, who are going to celebrate our connections. As the incoming governor of Chihuahua, Javier Corral, and I did just this last month, when we joined over 1,000 other El Pasoans and fronterizos from Juarez and El Paso, Chihuahua and Texas, some coming from parts further in the interior of both countries, to run a 10K race that started in downtown El Paso, went over the Stanton Street Bridge, through downtown Juarez, past all those wonderful places that I took Amy on our first date, and ended on that same international line that Edgar and Mari Cruz were married. We were there to remind ourselves and to show the rest of the country that the border is what makes America great. Thank you.
Thank you.